Hey, fellow mathers, welcome to the podcast where math is figure-outable. I'm Pam Harris, a former mimicker turned mather.
And I'm Kim Montague, a reasoner who now knows how to share her thinking with others. At Math is Figure-Outable, we are on a mission to improve math teaching.
We know that algorithms are super cool historic achievements, but they're terrible teaching tools because mimicking step-by-step procedures actually traps students into using less sophisticated reasoning than the problems are intended to develop.
In this podcast, we help you teach mathing, building relationships with your students, and grappling with mathematical relationships.
We invite you to join us to make math more figure-outable. Hey, I really like that part about building relationships with your students and mathematical relationships. That's nice. Yeah.
I like it.
Hey, Kim.
Hi. So,
Yes.
I say this all the time because I do like chatting with you and we have some fun conversations, but this episode is like a hot topic for me. and I get excited to talk about it. So
are you saying you're hot? You're hot today?
I have strong feelings about some things that I won't let go, and other things I'm like, well, whatever. It's, that's not a big deal. But when I feel strongly about something,
I mean, I don't know. Passionate. Do you and I feel strongly about anything?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So recently, like a month or two ago, you were somewhere. And then you came back and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something." And so why don't you tell listeners where you were and what happened? And
you betcha. So I was in the frigid north of Alberta. It actually wasn't that cold while I was there. It was and it was beautiful and wonderful people. I had such a good time. I had dinner with a team, Edmonton Public Schools. Is that what they call them? Edmonton? I think so. Edmonton Public. Yeah, a group of math consultants went out to dinner with them, and we were having a wonderful chat. Very, very thoughtful educators. We just had a great time. And one of them asked a super important question that I've been kind of grappling with. We've talked a little bit about it on the team, but man, I hadn't really heard what you thought about it. So one of the things that this particular person said is they want to be able to show that what they're doing is working. And so kind of flat out said, how do we assess reasoning? Do you have some sort of screener or assessment tool that could help all of us kind of prove that that students' reasoning is getting more sophisticated and that the professional learning that we're doing is working? And I really appreciate the need for leaders. It's super important to show that what we're doing is working so that then we continue. And if it's not working, then we pivot. Like what we don't want to do is just start implementing pick your thing, some sort of bandwagon thing. And then, I don't know, kind of get a feel, a couple of people complain. So then we just toss it and, we better do something completely new. Or, well, we did this thing last year and whether it worked or not, now we got to do a new thing this year. Can't tell you the number of times that I work with leaders who are kind of on this bandwagon approach to education where it's like, well, we did this kind of, I don't even know what to call it, bandwagon approach, this new thing. And we had the person come in and they talked about it. And we've done that. We're done with that. Now we got to do a new thing. What's the new thing this year? Who are we going to bring in? What's the new book? What's the new thing? I don't know. Can I just say thing? The new thing that we're going to do this year.
Lots of things.
Yeah, all the things. And we think it's important. And so I honor the fact that this leader was being very thoughtful to say, we want to have some data to say this is working. And so we're going to keep going, or this isn't working. And so we're going to pivot.
Smart.
Yeah, super important. So I came back and I said, hey, like what, Kim, what do you think about, what do you think about screeners? And often,
I think I might have laughed and said, I have all the words for this. And we were about to have a coaching session for
our coaching group. Yeah.
And you said, do you mind? Like, I don't know what you think about this. Do you mind if we just open it up and we just talk about it? And, we had some really great questions that month. And so, we really didn't get to it for the last bit and we just kind of ran out of time. But so we thought we would have the open conversation here.
Bam. All right.
I told them at the last few minutes that we had that if there were a continuum that you had to place yourself on for screener or no screener, like a universal screener for, putting kids wherever, then I am on the far, far side of no screener.
And I raised my eyebrows.
Yeah, you did.
Yep.
And I think really because there's just way too many issues that we can talk about some of them, but I think there's just way too many issues with the screeners that we use.
So let's get on the same page about screeners. So
Okay.
you
All right.
just said screener. What
Uh-huh.
is a screener? What do you mean when you say screener? A universal screener, a screener? What does
Yeah.
that mean to you?
So let me describe my perspective because I used in the classroom several different kinds, and I know there are many more now since I've left the classroom. But for screener, for me, when I was teaching, was hey, I got handed this thing. We used phonics screeners that had words on a page. There were hundreds of words, and I would call a student back, and they'd read words on the page, and I would mark, the ones I did or didn't know, or
Like a
um,
story or just random words?
just random words. We
Oh,
also,
fun.
yeah, some of them were incredibly long if they were well read or could word call very well. I also used another reading screener that they would read stories, we'd have conversation, and then basically I was to judge what level they were. The math screeners
Hey,
that we
hang on.
used.
Sorry. You said they were incredibly long. Something is that because if a kid couldn't
Oh,
read
the font.
words, then you stopped,
Yes. Okay. So
and
the
if they
so
could keep reading, then you had to do them all. Is that
yeah,
what
I
we?
figured I
Okay.
figured math people didn't care too much about those, but I want to
Well, I'm
give
just
you an
trying to figure out what
example.
you're talking about here,
Oh,
because
you
yeah,
didn't do phonics screeners. So phonics screener
no.
is a page, and the words were broken up into like vowel consonant or
Well, don't get
uh
too deep into
well,
it.
I mean,
Just
so there's sections. There's sections, and you'd start at the
okay.
top, and it'd be like cat, hat, bat at the top, and then at the end of the page were like 3 and 4 syllable words, and you would just start at the top, and they'd read, like word call all the way down, and you had to have these specific markings that you would do. So it took some time if your kid, could say a lot of words.
And you had to do this individually with every kid.
Right. And so I'll skip the one where they read a story, but that took even longer.
Okay. All right.
And so the math screeners, there were a couple of different kinds that I encountered. The ones that kind of burned their way into my brain for the longest were you could do whole class, but there was one that was all about computation. And so there were like just problems on a page. And so you would give them 7 minutes or 8 or whatever, and everybody could do it at the same time.
Meaning instead of an individual interview,
Right.
you're handing them something and they're like go, but
Yeah.
they're doing it individually. They're not
Yeah,
doing it
it's
as a
it's timed.
class.
Yeah, I give the instructions
Okay.
and then timed, and you do the thing.
Okay.
But then I scored them obviously individually, and the scoring for one in particular was based on digits in the problem. And then there was another one. We'll talk about.
Wait. Digits.
No, we'll talk about that later.
Oh,
Scoring.
sorry.
Just
Okay, sorry. Blah, blah, blah. Trying to keep up.
so then there was another kind that was concept based, and so it wasn't just computation problems. There were more about different ideas, so it might have something geometry or algebraic reasoning or whatever. But in any case, there were two different kinds of tests, and so we'd give them to the class, everybody would take it, and then we'd score their information, and then we'd put the scores into whatever the platform or whatever the system was in order to rank kids, either like red, yellow, green, or 1, 2, 3, or whatever. So it was a way to give out some sort of test in order to basically rate kids, to judge
Sort
kids,
kids.
to sort them.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's when you say universal screener or screener, that is one way. There are other screeners that people might have in mind where it's interview based. And so you would call a kid over. There's a set amount of things that you would ask. There are predetermined problems. You do the interview, you score the interview, you calculate the data, and then it's a ranking or it's a sorting system. That's what I mean when we're talking about screeners today.
Okay. And so maybe one reason why I have interestingly, how do I even say what I'm thinking? I didn't have to do that. So as a high school
Ah, yeah.
teacher, I never interviewed students. That wasn't a thing. I often gave them tests and quizzes.
Hmm.
There were, I could give them like pre-tests and stuff. I didn't because I didn't think they were very useful. But I, especially at one school, I had very specific common assessments that my students had to take, and I didn't write them. So there were some things like that, but
Hmm.
not what you're okay. So you're on the continuum of screener to no screener. You're on the side of no screener.
Right.
Let's talk why.
Yeah. Okay. So there's at least a handful of problems. One of the major problems is I'm going to use the word validity. I know that you're going to poke on my use of the word, but
Okay.
I don't buy that these tests are valid judges of students for a couple of reasons. Part of it is that the value that the students and teachers see in them affects how the students do on those screeners. I have a personal student who lives at my home who feels completely over-tested, can now, as he's gotten older, say all the words about being over-tested, and he just doesn't give a rip, to be honest with you, and doesn't really put in a lot of effort. He's got some teachers, or has had some teachers in his lifetime, that also don't really find them all that valuable. So because they don't value the test, what they go into, their mindset, their effort, their how
Willing
they facilitate
willingness.
it, yeah,
Yeah.
doesn't paint an accurate picture of academic knowledge. So I really struggle with kind of validity and value wrapped up together, because so much of these kinds of screeners depends on the test taker following what is designed for that test, and the facilitator following the expectations and the rules and the readings and whatever that is designed for that test, so that you can create a fair system of ranking kids. And all across schools, there are teachers who in their classroom are facilitating these kinds of things differently than the classroom next door, in how long they give for them. Do you let the kid finish the problem they're on if the timer goes off? Do you hard stop? Do you let them have side paper? Do you make them do it without extra paper? There are so many little tiny give and takes that happen, that by the nature of, we have humans facilitating these, and all kinds of different teachers in every classroom, it cannot be as valid as people think that they are.
And you just mentioned a kid who might like have an attitude of, I don't care, and so I'm not
Yeah.
gonna. But you
100.
also might have a kid who's, got stuff going on. Kids come with baggage,
Absolutely.
and maybe it's even just on the day that they take the screener, it's not going to be an accurate representation of what they know and can do, because of where they are, sort of emotionally, or
Well,
yeah.
yeah. So two of the tests that I gave were timed. One was a 7 minute or 8 minute, I can't remember. The other one was a 20 minute.
Hmm.
And if you are the kind of kid who feels pressure under time, there's no way to factor that anxiousness, that nervousness, that pressure that affect some kids that don't affect other kids. There's no way to factor for that.
Yeah.
With Yeah, so there's
So now we have a societal measure that says if you can handle the pressure, then then we're going to be able to measure what you actually know and can do in mathematics. If you can't handle the pressure, then instantly what we think you know and can do in mathematics takes a hit.
Mhm.
Like we really don't know, because your brain was flooded with chemicals, and so you're actually not being able to show us accurately what you actually can do. So there is something to, there's a colleague I know that runs a whole school that has a program, whatever, to help kids learn to deal with time pressure under tests.
Mhm.
I think that's interesting. I think I get the reason that you would do that, because we've created these situations where if you're going to do well, then you've got to be able to handle that time pressure.
Mhm.
So I kind of get that. I
Mhm.
question the premise itself that putting kids under time pressure is is going to give us an accurate representation of what all kids can do. I think it does
Yeah.
give us an accurate representation of what kids can do who can handle time pressure,
Mhm.
but I don't know that it does other than that. Is that part of your beef?
Yeah, I just actually saw a principal, uh, a woman who was a principal at an elementary school, and we were talking about screeners, and she was telling me that what she did in her school for a portion of time is that the whole school, they would shut the school down, and so it was, say Monday at 8 o'clock or whatever, the teachers would pass out a portion of their screener, and then they would read over the announcements on the intercom. They would set the timer, and as an attempt to make things
Standardized?
standardize, they
Yeah.
would they would do that as a
Common, consistent.
school-wide thing. Uh-huh.
Huh.
Another thing that people sometimes do to standardize it is you have the same screener, the same person screen for an entire grade level. So, there are some ways people are attempting to make
Is that
the
kind of like
results.
if you were doing an interview, then ideally you'd have the same person interview everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
One of the other ladies at my dinner was a preschool screener, which don't get me started on preschool screening, but she would go in. She was a former teacher who would go into a school that would hire her, and she would facilitate in order to take away from the teacher's time having to do it, but in order to make it more standardized, she was the screener for all of the kids so that it was more consistent. So I think people are trying to address
At least one of the
one of the
inconsistencies.
inconsistencies. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
interesting.
so the value people, and listen, here's the thing about my kid, right? He doesn't care about
He's
screener.
awesome, by the way.
He's feisty. I don't know where he gets it. So he is the kind of kid who part of the thing is he's figured it out. And so he will do these screeners. He doesn't really care about them because of the other issues I have with them. And so he won't really play the game, but then he shows up for the one state testing that he feels like he's going to get judged on at the end.
The one that's
So
going to matter. He's like, this one's going to matter. So I'm showing up for this one.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's
And so
interesting.
it gives a false impression of him, and he's not so concerned about time,
Well,
but it
wait.
causes
The screeners give a false impression,
right.
but the one he shows up for is it more accurate?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so then we have all kinds of issues. So there's a lot of kids, and we have these situations where we're screening kids and we think we know something about them, and then we may not know what we think we know. It might be inaccurate. Anyway, so value that people see in them, the way the tests are given are kind of hand in hand, but that is one issue that I have. You ready to go
Okay.
on to the next one?
Yes, I think so. Though I don't want to forget that at some point you said something about ranking kids. So I don't know where that comes in our conversation, but
Oh,
I
well,
do.
let's go there next.
Okay, because yeah, tell me, like the way you said it kind of could be interpreted that people give screeners in order to rank kids. Would you agree that there sometimes get people give screeners like we like the guys Forefront, their universal screener for number sense.
Hmm.
I don't know that they're about ranking kids. I think they're much more about knowing, finding out what kids know so they can build on that knowledge.
Yeah. Well, so the next two things I want to talk about are what we.
You have a list. All
I know,
right.
I do, I do.
Bring it on.
So you tell me which one you want to talk about. One is what we screen and
Okay.
why we screen.
Let's
Tell me where
go.
you want to go next.
Like in the order you gave it, what we screen. Go ahead.
Okay, so what we screen speaks to what we value. And sometimes as teachers, I know there's some teachers right now who are screaming, but I get told to, and you're spot on. Sometimes we get handed a screener and say, this is what we do at our school, and so you have to. And that was the case where I was teaching. It was what we did. And what we screened had nothing to do necessarily with
You just took a huge deep breath. I can tell how
listen,
you thought of, how'd you feel about that, Kim?
listen, I loved my principals, and it was a district mandate. And so, it was what we did. It was we need to know about kids. And so we screened them. But the problem is what we screened on this company made screener didn't reflect necessarily what was happening in my classroom.
Mm.
We were judging kids based on the experiences that were not happening for them. My kids weren't getting timed things. And so to screen them on a timed situation felt unfair to me. And the answer could be, well, give them timed stuff. No, I'm not bending. So one of the screeners that we used was all algorithm based. And like I mentioned earlier, the scoring of it was based on how many digits you got correct. So let's say you were given a problem like 49 plus 28, and the answer is 87. If you got, what did I just say? It's 77, 49 and 28. Good heavens. So if you got one of the sevens correct, you got a point. If you got both sevens correct, you got 2 points. And it didn't matter which 7 you got correct. So you could get the ones place digit correct, and you could say 87, like I said, and
Mhm.
get half credit. But if you got 88, or sorry, 78 or whatever, something close by, you got no points.
So
So it
you could have gotten a closer answer
correct.
that's really better in your lifetime,
Right.
but if neither digit was correct, you got no credit.
Right.
Interesting.
It also didn't matter which, so if it was a 3 or 4 digit number, it didn't matter which digit you got correct. So you could get the hundreds place, but no other digit correct, and you got some points.
Or even worse, the ones digit correct
Right.
and the hundredths was way off. So
Uh-huh.
the answer could be completely way off, but
Uh-huh.
you could still get some credit. But a kid could get really close and get
Uh-huh.
no credit if the digits were all a little bit off.
So here's where I, open and honest say, yeah, I didn't necessarily care to follow the scoring procedure
Kids, are you
because
telling us right now you didn't?
100% there were times where I was like, that's so dumb. So anyway, the what we screen mattered. It was created by somebody who wasn't looking at our standards. It was created by somebody who just was making a national test. And in Texas, we did not necessarily have the same standards that were made on this particular test.
Oh, so
How weird is that?
not only was it sort of algorithm based, but it wasn't even testing the right algorithms because it was not for the particular
Well,
state.
so the algorithms probably would have been, but if it was the portion of the test that was on concepts, there were plenty of concepts that were not in, say, third grade when my kids were taking a third grade one, which is
Because the
because it was a
standards are different.
universal screener. Yeah.
Yeah, huh.
So what we screen, I think, matters a lot, and the person who knows that is the person who's teaching.
So, Kim, would you say that was similar to when I had to take my students in high school had to take this common assessment, and I didn't write it. I didn't have any chance to have any input in writing it, and they would have to do this super esoteric factoring of polynomials
Mm-hmm.
that didn't matter to me because I was much busier thinking about how polynomials were created from adding terms that were other polynomials and what those graphs looked like and how that affected their end behavior and the short run behavior. And like there was a lot of kind of like I was gonna say math that I cared about
Mm-hmm.
that I spent less time on these esoteric factoring by grouping with crazy different uh, exponents and stuff instead of doing that. And so when when that question would show up on that test, I just would be like, whatever. I don't care that they're going to miss it because it's not important to me. Is
Right.
that similar?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's also a challenge with what we screen because we don't have control over, like you said, what's on it or how many times something's on it. So let's say we've got a student who is a fantastic mathematician who has a difficulty in one area. If that one area is on the test multiple times, does that make them a lesser mather than somebody who's only got that one type of question down?
Hmm. That's interesting. You just made me shudder a little bit because I could kind of get away with what I was just saying because there was usually only one or two of those stupid esoteric questions.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of them were good enough that then I wanted my students to do well on the rest of it. And so,
Mm-hmm.
since I taught well, they did. But yeah, if the test was all that, that would have made it harder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Part of the other problem that I have is, a lot of times we would screen beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year. I mean, at the time, that felt like a lot to me, but now comparatively, I mean, kids are always testing. And often at the beginning of the year, we would test on third grade or fourth grade, whatever I was teaching. We would test material that was going to be taught in that year. How wild. We would
Mm,
screen kids based on things that they were going to use that year.
yeah.
So
Is that similar to when my kid would come home and say, "Today we just took last year's release test." So, like when he was starting, say, fourth grade, we took the end of the year fourth grade test at the beginning of fourth grade, and he would say, I aced it. I got 100. Why am I even taking math
right,
this year?" Is
right.
that kind of a similar? Like it's not even.
Well, I love that for your kid, but
Well,
yeah,
no,
so
my point is it was useless. Like either
yeah,
the kids bombed it and then felt horrible about themselves and now they have this like, oh goody, this year's going to be horrible, or they aced it and then they're like, what am I going to do the rest of this year? I know all this stuff.
yeah.
Like that to
I
me
think that's a hard
doesn't.
place for a kid to be for sure.
Yeah. So like how does it help?
Yeah.
Like what? Well, yeah, I don't.
Well, and so what I don't love about the situation that I was in was that we were, I think it's safe to say that in those situations, most of the kids did not do well, right? It's the end of the year stuff.
Yeah.
But the bigger issue is then it's like sets up in your mind, like which kids might do well this year because they got a third of it already. Or which kids, am I really going to have to like work with a ton because they didn't get any of them? It's just, it's
Well,
such
not only in your
a,
mind, but in the kids' minds, right?
yeah,
Like everybody's minds are already kind of preset stuff.
yeah,
Yay.
yeah,
It's a great way to
yeah.
start the year. Yeah. Kim, it feels like we have a lot to talk about. I don't think we got to your second why we screen.
Yeah.
Y'all, what do you guys think about universal screeners? What do you think about the idea of like why do we give them? What are we screening? What kind of control do you have over it? How often do you have to screen? And how about let's have another episode and talk more about why we screen.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kim, you're right. I am going to poke a little bit on the word valid,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm also going to bring up the word reliable.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, let's
maybe
keep...
what we would actually suggest.
Yeah, what can we do? Because again, we started this episode with these wonderful, very thoughtful educators saying we need some data to prove that we're making this is working. We're making some ground. Yeah. All right, Kim, let's do it. Y'all, thank you for tuning in and teaching more and more real math. To find out more about the Math is Figureoutable movement, visit mathisfigureoutable.com and keep spreading the word that math is figureoutable.